Welcome to today's Explainer. We're embarking on a seriously fascinating, almost detective-like journey into the very heart of reality itself. Today, we're examining a radical and honestly entirely unconventional framework from our source material, the NKE model by Arndt Michelmeier-Meyer. It's a super ambitious attempt to explain a true theory of everything, an all-encompassing world formula. But here's the catch. He tries to do it not through increasingly complex math, but through pure, rigorous logic and emergence.
Okay, before we really jump into the deep end, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered how an electron actually knows how it's supposed to behave? Do electrons secretly study mathematics? Is there some sort of microscopic university for little photons? Obviously not, right? Physical objects have absolutely no concept of the laws of physics, and yet they obey them perfectly. This simple but wildly fundamental question drove the author for nearly half a century, and it forms the absolute rock-solid foundation of his research.
Section 1. The Ultimate Physics Mystery.
To really grasp why the NKE model takes such a wildly different approach, we have to look at why classical physics basically threw in the towel on finding a theory of everything a long time ago. According to the sources, mainstream science essentially stopped looking for the absolute root cause of existence way back around the 1930s. Physicists shifted their focus, understandably, to calculating local phenomena with greater and greater precision. They sort of stepped into the light, where things could be measured, published, and calculated, rather than wrestling with the completely untouchable void of what came before the universe even began.
Right, so let's unpack this. Why did so many brilliant minds just give up? Well, the document identifies two massive, seemingly insurmountable cognitive roadblocks. The first is Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Basically, this states that you can never fully prove a complex system mathematically from the inside. But if your world formula is literally everything, well, there is no outside left to prove it from. The second roadblock is that classic, age-old paradox of causality. If A comes from B, who created B? Or more simply, who created the creator? These two logical hurdles made a traditional mathematical derivation of everything virtually impossible.
Which brings us to Section 2, Building the Logic Swamp.
Because classical mathematics hits a total brick wall here, the author had to develop a completely new method to navigate around these paradoxes over his 50-year investigation. He calls this solution the swamp model. Imagine the entire space of the unknown is just a giant, treacherous swamp. Instead of running in blindly or relying on super complex mathematical constructs that aren't actually proven yet, you place flags on the very few points you are 100% certain of. From one point of absolute certainty, you carefully, painstakingly lay a logical plank to the next. It's essentially building a case on purely circumstantial evidence.
The author calls these safe stepping stones lemmas, basically inescapable logical constraints. Put them together and they form something like a criminal profile for the origin of the universe. First up, to bypass that whole who created the creator headache, everything absolutely must emerge from total nothingness. Second, symmetries have to break, otherwise we'd have no structure at all. Third, forces can't just act like invisible magic rubber bands across huge distances. Everything has to happen through direct, local contact. And fourth, kind of channeling Descartes here, we exist, therefore this theory of everything must exist, even if we can't mathematically prove it in the traditional way.
Section 3. The busful process revealed. All right, now that we have our logical profile of the culprit, our sources lay out the specific core mechanism the author proposes as the bedrock of reality. The visual roadmap here illustrates the concept of nothing, crust, something, or NKS for short. You can see the progression starting from absolute nothingness on one side, totally unstructured and empty, moving across an infinitely thin virtual separation layer, the crust, all the way to something, which is our structured reality. The beauty of this proposed idea, it requires no creator, no wild extra assumptions, just this one fundamental self-referential step.
At the absolute heart of this emergence is what the author dubs the busfill process. The name is actually an acronym for its properties. It is binary, infinitely fast, infinitely fine, and omnipresent. Think of it as essentially a tautology. It's a process that simultaneously, in an infinite number of places, separates pure nothingness into two parts, using that infinitely thin virtual crust. And it's from this eternal, unbelievably fast separation that the foundational mesh of our universe is supposedly born.
Let's trace how this actually builds our tangible world step by step. If this separation process were perfect all the time, everything would just instantly cancel itself out right back into nothingness. But because the process is infinite, microscopic symmetry breaks inevitably happen.
These tiny breaks leave behind errors, what the model calls orphaned resonances that can't find a counterpart to dissolve with. And out of this massive, chaotic sea of leftover, borrowed resonances, the actual matter that makes up you and me structures itself.
Moving on to Section 4, emergence, nothing to something.
So how does this chaotic ocean of unresolved resonances actually become the incredibly stable, precise world we interact with every day? To explain this emergence, the author draws a really sharp contrast with mainstream physics like string theory. He frames string theory as a top-down design, a gorgeously complex mathematical sculpture, sure, but one that needs dozens and dozens of free parameters just to fit reality. The NKE model, on the other hand, is strictly bottom-up. It claims to be entirely self-organizing, operating with exactly 0 predetermined parameters. Space, time, the constants of nature, the whole shebang must emerge entirely on its own from that busfill process.
Okay, wrap your head around this incredibly tiny number, 10 to the power of minus 121. In standard physics, this is known as the cosmological constant problem. It's this mind-boggling discrepancy in vacuum energy. But in the NKE model, it's not a calculation error at all. This number represents the exact, minuscule remainder of asymmetry left over from those symmetry breaks in the busfill process. It's the precise fraction of infinity that doesn't cancel out, and it's literally what our expanding universe is made of.
From that unimaginably small remainder, the author proposes that reality basically stacks up into 3 permeable layers. At the very bottom, you have the completely unstructured busfill mesh. Right above that, stable potential frequency patterns start to form. And at the very top, in layer 3, those resonances interact as what we experience as solid matter. Now, the author is super explicit about one thing here. There is absolutely no magical 4th layer for human consciousness. In this model, our consciousness is just a highly complex, interacting resonance phenomenon. It's purely physical, firmly anchored right there in the 3rd layer.
Section 5. Math, Truth, and Limits. So if reality just emerges from pure logic and vibrations, you're probably wondering, where does mathematics actually fit into this NKE model? Well, in this universe, math doesn't create reality. It's not some puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes. Instead, the author views math as the ultimate, incorruptible measuring stick. The laws of nature and the formulas we all know, they just measure, with absolute, perfect precision, the stable structures that happen to build up from that underlying chaos.
And this is exactly where the author brings in 4 absolute titans of mathematics to act as circumstantial evidence. First, Gödel's logic is used to show why symmetry breaks are inescapable. Then, Falting's theorem is brought in as mathematical proof for why only a limited, finite number of stable structures can emerge from infinite chaos. Fourier analysis steps in to conceptually break complex physical objects back down into base waves. And finally, the Riemann hypothesis is used to prove that these innermost base resonances follow a perfect harmonic order.
Finally, Section 6, the new meaning search. I know we've covered some incredibly dense physics and math today, but at the end of his treatise, the author brings all of this cold, cosmic mechanics right back down to a deeply human, philosophical level. The big takeaway is that out of all this endless, jittering chaos, exactly 95 stable chemical elements emerge. He likens it to a self-stabilizing orchestra. Frequencies dampen and amplify each other until they reach a perfect harmonic equilibrium. There is no conductor. There is no grand planner stepping in from the outside. The universe just keeps itself alive through its own emergent resonance.
Which brings us to a really sobering but honestly kind of liberating conclusion. The author writes, and I'm quoting here, "The TOE does not solve the meaning problem. It merely shifts it. It takes away our excuse for not having to find it ourselves." When you really grasp the purely mechanical origin of reality he's proposing, you realize the cosmos doesn't just hand you an inherent meaning. The meaning doesn't come from understanding the universe. It comes from what we actually do within it.
Arndt Michael Meyer's NKE model takes us from literal, absolute nothingness through this eternally vibrating process right into the lap of our own responsibility. It strips away the mystery to give us total freedom. So I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to chew on today. If reality really is nothing more than a wonderfully complex emergent orchestra without a conductor, what will you do with the time and the life you have now that you realize you have to write the melody yourself? Stay curious, everybody, and we'll see you in our next explainer.